He was celebrating his birthday on a sub chaser out of Boston, out there guarding the shipping lanes to get our men over to France. It's probably the best birthday present he could have had at age 29, to realize that his U.S. Navy career may be a little shorter than he thought it might be going to be. Here in Leesburg, on this day 100 years ago, people found out little by little. It was before radio. We certainly had newspapers. We had telegrams that would have gone up and down the Washington and Old Dominion Railroad, and people would have come into Leesburg and they would have celebrated. The gathering place, well, for all things Leesburg, the gathering place had always been right out front here, just as you gathered this morning. And then the newspaper owner who lived across the street, or his offices were, Mr. Harrison, stood up there on those same steps, and to an overjoyed crowd about to launch on a parade of honking horns and screaming ladies hanging off the running boards of cars, he gave a speech of thanks that a war that already had killed 116,500 Americans in 6 months was going to be over. It wasn't as long, but keep in mind that everything we tell you this morning, that the first American soldiers did not really arrive in any serious numbers until the spring and summer and early fall of 1918. Our armed forces were minuscule when we entered the war. So you're at an historic site that looks now almost exactly as it did on that Monday 100 years ago today. It's almost frightening to stand on these steps and look out at King Street and realize that what I see now is so much exactly as it was 100 years ago, which is a credit to Loudoun County people, isn't it? To have been able to preserve that. Let me start. My program is an overview, and once I turn this magical little device on, with any luck at all, we'll get right to it. Over there comes to Main Street. Yeah, what was it like here? And a little bit about what it was like when those boys and girls from here went over there. A typical Main Street, that's West Main Street in Percival. In 1917, when we went to war, 3 years into the Great War, Loudoun County was an overwhelmingly rural community. The most rural part of Loudoun was eastern Loudoun, with a handful of people and a lot of dairy farms. And western Loudoun with some of the best farms in the country. This is a scene along the Washington Old Dominion Railroad between Hamilton and Percival. It's how we got around in Loudoun County. At the same moment we were rural, the United States was urbanizing at a record rate. This is New York City, and a photograph taken in January 1917. If you had an hour and a half, you could probably pick this picture to pieces and make some sense of it. But this is a scene taken from just in front of the courthouse here about the same time. A little slower locally. Definitely, if you were in the motor age in Loudoun County, you might be coming to an area where you might need a little bit of help. Numbers. If you look at the American population, we have finally crested 100 million in 1910. We've been growing phenomenally, massive in-migration, particularly from Eastern and Southern Europe in recent years, and Virginia's population has not received very much of that. Loudoun County's population, believe it or not, is less than it was before the Civil War. The hit we took 50 years earlier was still something that people remembered. And when we came for big days here at the courthouse, you were always reminded of what had been, because you would see those veterans, mostly Confederate, but some Union veterans too. Loudoun had provided both. When we went to war, Loudoun County was watching this through the Baltimore papers and occasionally a Washington paper. Our thought was fairly simple. How could this happen? We watched with the same horror we've watched in the last week mass shootings and massive fires raging in California, with that kind of odd, oh my gosh, not knowing quite what to make of it. Those of us who know were fascinated, and at local drugstores, you could buy postcards of that war. We were fascinated by the new technology, by the uniforms. We were also counseled by our Virginia-born president, Thomas Woodrow Wilson, that it would be best if we stayed neutral. And it wasn't just because we didn't want to be involved in the war. We did want to be involved in the war, but the role for the United States with our providential creation was that we would be the peacemakers. And you can't be a peacemaker if you're siding with one side. And so we must be neutral in both word and deed. He counseled us, but oh, how hard that was. Most of you know the story of those next 3 years. Perhaps you've heard of the torpedoing of the Lusitania, a passenger liner that once was the biggest in the world and went down in 18 minutes, 128 Americans lost. Or, as we began more and more to trade with France and Britain, since Germany could not come with surface ships to pick up anything, their only ships that came were going to be U-boats, we gradually began to lean that way. And the more you study German sabotage efforts in the United States, to the point that in the summer of 1916, a dock blown up in New Jersey, the concussion cracked the arm of the Statue of Liberty such that to this day we cannot go up in it. Those kinds of things changed our mind. And as we went through the various scenes of that war, then we changed our minds. I think the thing that put us over the edge was certainly learning that the Germans were beginning to negotiate with the Mexican government to give the Mexicans a piece of the southern United States that once had been Mexico. That was in early 1917 with the help of the British intelligence services, who intercepted German telegrams between Europe and Mexico. The Zimmermann telegram, as it was called at the time. And within days, President Wilson was asking for a declaration of war, something that, if you understand his commitment to peace, was probably the most difficult single thing he ever did, other than the day he had his stroke. This is him on Monday the 2nd of April, and just 4 days later, at the end of that week, on the 6th of April, Congress gave him a declaration of war, and suddenly our attempts to remain neutral were going to be revised. We would enter the war on behalf of the Allies, Great Britain, France, and Russia, who would soon be leaving the war, against Germany, and try to act as the best arbiter we could in the peace talks that we were sure would follow. But what we don't tell you is, at the moment we entered the war, we were frightfully afraid we were too late, and that France and Britain were about to collapse. And if you do not understand that, you need some reading. The situation was dire at the point we entered, but we usually don't tell people that. This is Purcellville. The date is June the 5th, 17, and we are now 2 months into the war. We have required that all men of a certain age, between 21 31 register for the draft for selective service, and rather than asking everyone to go to sign up, we are instead asking for you to submit yourself as part of a national registration to be completed by June 5th, 1917, and your local selective service board will decide where you could be of most use. What that means is many Loudoners would be most of use doing what they were doing. If you worked in the railroad, we needed you to do that. If you farmed, we got to feed all these people. And you would get your certificate if you had signed up by June the 5th, and it would say to you, "Greeting, having submitted yourself to a local board composed of your neighbors for the purpose of determining the place and time in which you could best serve the United States in the present emergency, you are hereby notified that you have now been selected for immediate military service." Why do we call it selective service? Because not everybody's going in the military. But everybody needs to be part of a national pool that will assist in the present emergency. These men stood right out in front of this courthouse. Did any of you come through the swinging gate this morning? They're standing there being photographed by the photographer for the Loudoun Times, who was in the office on the second floor, which is now the Cosa Nostra restaurant, is it? It's an Italian restaurant just up the street on West Market. And the photographer would come around and they would say this: "If you send us a letter home from France addressed to Mr. Harrison at the newspaper, we will send you a subscription." And you can imagine some poor doughboy on the march with a tattered copy of the Loudoun Times trying to see what the baseball scores in Loudoun were, because we were vicious in our baseball rivalries. Aldi or Unison, Bloomfield, some places we barely know anymore that play. These boys will get their subscription. They're the first ones to sign up, and they are going to march up East Market, down Church Street, where the parking garage is today for the county building, and to the train station. That gate is still there. The train station is still there, though slightly moved. Fireworks Pizza at Market Station is today the old Leesburg train station. Moved a little bit. But if you think of that, you can do what a recruit did 100 years ago. You can march from that gate, you can march down that street, you can go to Fireworks Pizza and have yourself a Coke or a beer, and it will be a little bit different than it was for those boarding a train for Alexandria to be shipped down to Camp Lee near Petersburg, where you would be trained. This is Camp Lee, with a Loudoun man standing with a group. He is our governor, Westmoreland Davis from Leesburg, from Morven Park, elected in 1917. For most of the boys called up, they will get to know him. He makes many trips for the governor's mansion at Richmond, down to visit the boys at Camp Lee in training. And he became the doughboys' best friend in as many ways as he could. He had been in the Virginia militia as a boy, and while they left Virginia to make his millions in New York, he'd come back and become very supportive of the common man. Most of those from Loudoun who went into several different units. The most common was to go to the 80th Blue Ridge Division. Men from particularly Virginia, a few from Ohio, quite a few from West Virginia, and a few from Maryland and DC. This is the patch for the 80th Division that you would have worn on your arm, and a few of them had the unmitigated good luck of getting sent to the 3rd Division, 38th Regiment, Regular Army. What must be real fun is to be a draftee and thrown in with the regular army. I wonder how they treated you. At least you'd learn from the best. Your uniform, much like the one that sits from a Leesburg boy here on the front table. You'd be shipped out of Newport News on a transport. This is photographed in Hampton Roads, about to go under what today would be the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel and then out through the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which wasn't there, neither of them were, and off you went with submarine escort over to Brest, or Saint-Nazaire, in the northwest corner of Brittany in France. And then you would be sent on a boxcar, and there you were sent to the Western Front. Here at home, people got busy. There's nothing like somebody else having to go, your son, your neighbor's son, your nephew, and your home. Now, many of you remember this, even from the Gulf or the Iraq or Afghanistan wars, but this thing was different because everybody was in this pool. It was a draft. It wasn't a volunteer army. And so at home here, at places like this industry, which many of you have eaten at, Magnolia's at the mill in Percival, was one of the many grain mills along the WNOD. And I use it as an example. It was owned by Mr. Hearst. It was owned by Mr. Smith, the Smith and Hearst Mill. And their two sons both were called up. But here we are in the capital of grain. It's what we grow here in Loudoun County. Wheat, corn, and barley, and oats, and rye, particularly wheat. And we're going to be told that our part, just as you see in the poster up here, food is ammunition. We are saving you, save food. So, we will do our part. There will be, let's see, meatless Mondays, tasteless Tuesdays, Wednesdays were wheatless, Saturdays were sweetless, and we came out with as many other alliterations as we could to get you to help out on your own. And Loudoners did their fair share. They saved wheat, meat, and fats, and sugar in the cause of freedom, all led by this man who will become more famous later, Herbert Hoover, the U.S. Food Administrator. We got to know him well. We thought of him as a virtual magician. We ended up with enough food somehow to do it all, and we had no rationing. Amazing. He'll be president later. Now, we got to pay for this. The first thing you better realize is, unlike you and me, our huge contribution to the recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq was to suffer through a tax cut. I remember going a few days after 9/11 down to the new mall. The Dallas Town Center was mobbed. So we suffered through by spending money on ourselves. They suffered through by having a massive tax cut. You make $1 million, anything over $1 million is going to be taxed at 90%. Temporarily, for the war emergency. We're going to ask you to buy bonds. Bonds at Percival National Bank, or ones like this. This is a poster from Loudoun County. Lady Liberty is calling you for the Liberty loan. Will you buy a bond? Will you help us stamp out the Kaiser? Will you go across the street to what's now Lightfoot, to People's National Bank, and buy one of these bonds? Well, the good thing is, folks, most people don't have that kind of money. So we get around that. I'm telling you to buy war savings stamps. You can see posters for that. They're all around us. Look at this. This is absolutely a gorgeous example. How much? 25 cents a stamp. Hey, a kid could buy one of those. Imagine your elementary school teacher saying, you saved that nickel, you get 5 of those babies, 5 of those buffaloes, and by golly, you could buy yourself a war savings stamp. And you'll get your money back with interest later. So it's an all-out war. There's Governor Davers buying $10,000 worth from a lady who could probably sell you anything anyway. But it was all for a patriotic cause. Now, if you were to forget, we have a way around that. And it's very simple. And it's called the 4-minute bend. When you go to the movies, we have to change reels about halfway through. So during that 4 minutes, when usually you'd stand and cough or maybe go to the gentlemen's of the ladies, they would have someone prominent locally stand up. Whether you were at the movies in Hamptons Hall, now the White Palace in Percival, or at the Opera House at Loudoun and King, where they're reworking that site right now. It used to be the old hub and then an antique store and something new's going in. Gone since 1955. Or even if you were to go to McLean's store in Lovettsville, if you know that, that was the movie theater in Lovettsville, powered by a generator because they didn't have electric power like Leesburg and Percival. You would hear a 4-minute man during the reel change. If you were to go to church, you would hear during the services not only prayers for the president, prayers for our doughboys over there, but also when the Red Cross was having its ladies' knitting service program meet, probably Wednesday morning, and you would go to your church. This is the Methodist Church in Percival, now Paul's Funeral Home, the Episcopal Church in Percival, but think of how many churches we have in Leesburg that would have been participating, whether it's St. James just up Cornwall Street, or the Methodist Church or the Baptist Church, all that are close to the courthouse. They all would have been participating. They are knitting socks for the Red Cross that look like that. And boy, do you need them. You've got to have wool. You've got to have a change. And when those guys are going to get over there, the first thing they figure out is, you know, don't visit France in late September. There's one kind of weather, cold and rainy. And it seems like the worst of the offensives of the war, everybody was soaked, freezing, and starting to get pneumonia or the flu from it. So those socks were important. Yes, we have to talk about French women. There's a beautiful editorial in the Loudoun Times talking by one guy writing a letter home and saying, don't you girls back in Loudoun worry, because by gum, those French women don't mean a thing to us. And we just love our beautiful girls in the shadow of the Blue Ridge. It's really funny. You look at the girls in 1917, they all look like they just got off the Titanic. You look at them in 1918, they've all got their husband's clothes on or looking like it. By 1920 or 21, they all look like Parisian girls, and their hair is getting short, and the skirts have come up about 1.5 feet. Everything has changed. So, yes, our boys might indeed have to worry about this sneaky lady who disappears upon command. What we were going into is to fight the best army in the world, although some would disagree. The German army is shockingly good at what they do, using information and technology and training. The Maxim machine gun is an unbelievably powerful tool. Gas is an unbelievably powerful tool. Artillery is worse than either. And about 2/3 of our people, who, when they face the Germans, will be killed by high explosive artillery. Most of our boys know that Americans will do it differently and will do it with more vigor. And so when we get to those trenches in July, we'll say, for the early ones, some of them arrive in June and have thrown right against the last big German offensive. We had 2 guys in Loudoun who died at Belvoir Wood. Any of you are U.S. Marines out there? If you are, would you raise your hand? Anybody who's a Marine? If you're a U.S. Marine, you know about Belvoir Wood, just outside Chateau Thierry. It's 45 minutes from Paris. The Germans were that close to collapsing France, and we got in there in the nick of time. A Clark County soldier was told by a French officer, "We're retreating." And his comment was, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." And it seemed to be the American attitude. These are men getting ready for our big offensive. This is called Meuse-Argonne. It's September of 1918. And it will be one of the most disgusting military operations Americans have ever been involved in if you had to participate. I can't even begin to tell you how difficult it was. I've seen nothing, I've read nothing like it. I will tell you though, at the end of 6 weeks of pushing against the Germans, the statistics are stunning. In this single offensive, 26,777 doughboys, not casualties like when we cite 51,000 at Gettysburg. That's killed, missing, wounded, that's everybody. We're just talking 26,777 killed and 95,786 wounded in 6 weeks. And we've forgotten it. Say it with me. Meuse Argonne. It's between the Meuse River and the Argonne Forest in this little valley that's about the size of the Loudoun Valley. And we lost, what? Casualties, 125,000 people there? That's stunning. So think about what that did to Loudoun when they begin to realize those statistics. And when we read the names today, notice how many will go in the Meuse Argonne. And the armistice finally came on that November 11th, 100 years ago today. And the boys came home to Newport News. They marched through an American-made Arc de Triomphe. There's a model of it that's still there in the docks of Newport News. You can march through it too, as the doughboys did when they came home and had their pictures taken and were given their medals. Thanks to Kim Holian. This is the medal that Loudoun boys were given. This was granted in 1919, July the 25th, at a special ceremony. And where was that ceremony held, do you think?
Right here.
Here. Yes, and it says, presented for the people of Loudoun County, Virginia. Someone who had gone for this great campaign to make the world safe for democracy. Thank you so much.